Okay. Oh, you have the budget now for a laptop specifically outside of BCPS that's geared towards just streaming. Women.
Are we ready?
Good evening, everyone. We weren't. Good evening, everyone. Okay, now we can get started. Good evening. This is Board Chair Johnette Richardson. I would like to welcome you all to the April 11th Public Board Meeting of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. If you're joining us virtually, if you have not yet done so, please mute your phone. Anyone who does not mute their phone may be muted by the call moderator or removed from the call. Additionally, if you are not a board member or the CEO and her staff, please turn your video off. I will now read a roll call of the board to identify who is here with us in person or have joined us virtually. Please identify yourself first before speaking for the record. I will go through the same roll call for each vote. Commissioner McFadden,
McFadden, present.
Commissioner Brooks,
Present.
Commissioner Coy,
Here.
Commissioner Esposito,
Present.
Commissioner Griffin, Commissioner Katz-Zogby,
Present.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay, Commissioner Reed,
Present.
Commissioner Roberts, Commissioner Sally,
Present.
Commissioner Slater Harrington,
Present.
and I am here. That makes us 10 present with 2 absent. Is there a motion to reopen the meeting?
So moved, McFadden.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Is there a second?
Second, Bay.
I heard Commissioner
Sally.
Commissioner Sally. Thank you. All in favor? Commissioner McFadden?
Yes.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes.
Commissioner Coy?
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito?
Yes.
Commissioner Katsagbi?
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Sally?
Yes.
Commissioner Slater Harrington?
Yes.
And I'm in favor. That motion passes with 10 in favor and 2 absent. Now we will have our presentation of colors by the JROTC at Morgenthaler Vocational Technical High School. Let's all stand. I would like to thank Cadet Commander Jamal Alexander, Taneria Gray, Sierra Johnson, Thomas Williams, and Mohammed Saab. Is there a motion to approve the prior open session minutes?
So moved, Commissioner Sally.
Thank you, Commissioner Sally. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Kenyatta Bay. All in favor, Commissioner McFadden, Commissioner Brooks.
Yes.
Commissioner Coy,
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito,
Yes.
Commissioner Katsagbi,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Sally,
Yes.
Commissioner Slater Harrington,
Yes.
and I am in favor. That motion passes with 10 in favor and 2 absent. Is there a motion to approve the closed session summaries?
So moved, Kenyatta Bay.
Thank you, Commissioner Kenyatta Bay. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Slater Harrington. All in favor, Commissioner McFadden, Commissioner Brooks,
Yes.
Commissioner Coy,
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Sally,
Yes.
Commissioner Slater Harrington,
Yes.
and I am in favor. That motion passes with 9 in favor and 2 absent. I want to again say hello to everyone. I am excited to be here tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed their spring break. I know that I did, and I hope you all received some much needed relaxation and peace. The proposed operating budget for school year 23-24 will be presented for the board's consideration tonight. The budget is one of the board's most important responsibilities because it ensures the best use of resources critical to prepare students for higher education and/or life-sustaining careers. The budget also highlights additional funding, such as one-time funding provided to city schools like Kerwin for outreach, recovery planning, and other initiatives. When we are presented with the budget and other important priorities for the district, we gather community feedback to ensure our direction is appropriate for those we serve. Therefore, I want to highlight that next week, the board will host 2 events that focus on gathering public feedback on tonight's proposed budget and other topics. The first event is a virtual meeting called the Springboard Budget Session. This meeting will allow you to share your thoughts on budget priorities. This session will be held virtually on Tuesday, April the 18th from 6 to 7 p.m. The second event is the Family and Community Board Forum. The board has been hosting these forums across the city throughout this school year. These have allowed us to engage with the public and receive a lot of very helpful feedback from staff, parents, and community members. But this time, we want to hear from our students. So our next forum will be for the board to hear feedback from students on various topics. This event will be held here at the North Avenue headquarters in the first floor boardroom on Wednesday, April 19th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Students who cannot come in person can also join the conversation virtually. To register or learn more about the Springboard Budget Session and Family and Community Board Forum, please visit www.baltimorecityschools.org/board-meetings. Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the PEP?
So move, McFadden.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Is there a second?
Second, Sally.
Thank you, Commissioner Sally. All in favor, Commissioner McFadden?
Yes.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes.
Commissioner Coy?
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito?
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Sally?
Yes.
Commissioner Slater Harrington?
Yes.
And I am in favor. That motion passes with 9 in favor and 2 absent. I want to now turn it over to Dr. Santelises for CEO comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to invite Chief Emily Nielsen to come for this evening's PEP agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Good evening, commissioners. On our PEP tonight, we have an appointment from the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer recommended that Jenna Neems, currently Educational Specialist 2 in Academics 21st Century Buildings, be appointed Coordinator, Instructional Leadership, Evaluation and Training effective June 5th, 2023. And 2 appointments from the Office of the Chief of Schools recommended that Dana Collins, currently Interim Principal at Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women, be appointed Principal at Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women effective April 12th, 2023. And recommended that Mavis Jackson, currently Interim Principal at Digital Harbor High School, be appointed Principal, Digital Harbor High School, effective April 12th, 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Nielsen. As has become our practice, our custom, I just want to give a little further background on tonight's principal appointments. Dana Collins currently serves as the interim principal at Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women. Previously, she served Bliss for 9 years as a teacher, IEP chair, and assistant principal. She began her career in Baltimore as an elementary school teacher in East Baltimore in 2005. Ms. Collins states, "I believe wholeheartedly in the mission of Bliss, and I am honored." Oh my God, I'm saying it is Bliss.
Yes.
Okay, thank God. I was thinking it was Lily May. Woo, you can tell I'm back from break. I'm so sorry. Break, it is break brain. I'm so sorry. I believe wholeheartedly, Ms. Collins states, "I believe wholeheartedly in the mission of Bliss, and I am honored to lead this school community." She holds a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Salisbury University, a master's in reading from Towson University, and received her leadership certification from Loyola University. Congratulations, Principal Collins. Mavis Jackson served as Director of College Readiness for the last 3 years, where she spearheaded several key initiatives. Prior to that, Ms. Jackson was a computer science teacher and served in numerous school-based leadership roles. Being a teacher was the most impactful time in her career because she helped to shape how students enter and experience high school. There she is. Ms. Jackson's work in education began at the Able Foundation, where she recruited Baltimore City boys to attend the Baraka School in Kenya, Africa, and the Pineywood School, my uncle's alma mater, in Jackson, Mississippi. She was also a college-bound advisor. Her belief in city schools is affirmed in her own children. She has 2 Poly graduates from 2010, 2012, 1 Dunbar graduate, 2011, and a June 2023 Poly graduate. Ms. Jackson earned both her graduate and undergraduate degrees from Towson University and is a 1994 graduate of Western High School. Congratulations, Principal Jackson. To both principals tonight, we're thrilled to see you. Thank you for leading in Baltimore City Public Schools. I would like to continue this evening by congratulating the Mervo Kid Wind team, who took first, second, and third place at the 2023 Maryland Regional Kid Wind Challenge. Kid Wind is a national hands-on wind turbine design competition to gauge engineering and problem-solving skills, featuring teams from districts across the state of Maryland. Not only did the Mervo team sweep the top prizes at the competition, they also won, and I love this, a sportsmanship award for helping another team that was struggling. The Mervo team is now eligible for the national competition in Colorado in May. Yes, it is awesome. We will be inviting our Mervo Kidwin team to a future board meeting so we can recognize them in person and learn more about their projects. But in the meantime, congratulations on both your skills and your sportsmanship. It is now my great pleasure to congratulate our own Dr. Tracy Durant for being honored as one of the Baltimore Business Journal's 2023 Leaders in Diversity. The annual award program seeks to recognize leaders who have demonstrated a deep understanding of the value of inclusivity and its mission to support individuals across the spectrum of race, gender identity, and disabilities. And I can think of no one more deserving of this honor. Dr. Durant joined City Schools as Executive Director of Equity in 2017 and oversaw City Schools' ratification of Maryland's first racial equity policy in June 2018. She has led the expansion of our equity office staff to 12 members to better accomplish their mission of changing outcomes for young people so the race is no longer a predictor of academic success by working with staff at the district office and in schools to fulfill the standards outlined in the equity policy. I would now like to invite Dr. Durant to come forward to speak about the progress of the equity team. Congratulations, Dr. Durant.
Good evening, Commissioners, Dr. Santelises. Really excited to be able to give you this update. I remember sitting in this seat. I think John Davis was sitting next to me the first time we brought the equity policy before the board. And I don't think commissioners especially know this, but I will share it now. I was literally unable to move after the board adopted the equity policy because I was afraid I was going to literally pass out from so much joy. I got right out of the camera eyesight, and then I burst into tears because I was so honored to be given this incredible responsibility and this opportunity to shepherd our organization through the implementation of board policy ADA. It has been my pleasure to lead this work. I remember talking with Chief Perkins Cohen and Dr. Sanselises before I applied, knowing it was going to be an office of one. We committed to growing, and actually when we are fully staffed, we will be at 13 people, adding 4 more with the board's approval of our budget. So I'm really excited about the work that the team has been able to do to support the launch of our school equity action teams in schools, our racial equity driven leadership teams in central office, our Equity Center Pipeline Initiative, which is our 5-year, $8.2 million Wallace initiative, the amazing support that we've gotten from the philanthropic community. Our principals, our teachers, our staff have really leaned in. When I am talking about this work in other places, people often ask me, how are you able to do the work that you have done since 2018 when the office started? And unequivocally, there are 2 things that have been most important. One, it does matter who the leader is of the organization. And Dr. Sonia Sanselises has been committed to the way that we have led this work. She supports the work in front of people, behind people. She is the person who, when people say things like, who is protecting my name when I'm not in the room, it is Dr. Sonia Sanselises, and this work could not happen without her. And then it is the board. None of this work moves without a board that is committed to this work. And we are not facing what other people are facing in this nation because we have the leadership that we have. And I am fortunate to have an amazing group of people who walk with me every day to lead this work. So I'm so thankful for my team. I am thankful for my family who has loaned me to city schools and to Baltimore City, because I was terrified to take this job because I wanted to get it right. My mother passed in January, and she was proud of me every single day that I led this work. And so every night when I go to sleep, I am asking myself, did I do what I was put here to do? And I think that we are making good progress. And I think when my time is done here and when my time is done on this earth, I will forever be blessed and humbled to have been a small part of the work that we are doing in Baltimore City schools and for the children in Baltimore City. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate you all.
I just want to, again, no, I'm just saying thank you. That's all right. I just really want to thank Dr. Duran and her staff, because truly they work very hard on behalf of every single member of the city schools family. So we collectively celebrate with you, Dr. Duran. And then finally, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Reed, please.
I just appreciate you for always being frank and honest with me. It may be a little painful for me sometimes, but I really appreciate it because later on I think about it and say, hey, I respect her. So I really respect what you do. Thank you.
I know I was just barreling through. Thank you, Commissioner Reed, for stopping me. Commissioner Coy.
I was just going to add, also thank you for what you've done across the state of Maryland. I know this has been said before, but bears repeating, which is much of some of the work that's happening around the state has been modeled and followed in that step, and including, but certainly least among them, the conference. I had the opportunity to attend part of a conference that you helped organize and shepherd and grow, and just thinking about how important this work is and to build a coalition of folks all working. It's not enough to have it in one spot. It needs to permeate throughout the organization and across the state.
Great. I gave my wait time a little better then. Thank you both. And then finally, later this evening, our finance, academics, and schools teams will present highlights from our proposed fiscal year 24 budget. This document represents our ongoing investments in areas that staff, families, students, and community community members have prioritized as being important to the continued progress of our young people. Mental health supports, school culture and climate, expanded academics and extended learning, tutoring, and student wholeness priorities like fine arts and athletics. And like all budgets, it reflects our willingness to commit our finite resources in the areas of greatest impact for our schools, students, and families. Madam Chair, this concludes my remarks for the evening.
Thank you. We will now hear a presentation from the Office of New Initiatives Executive Director Angela Alvarez on operator location and waiver requests.
Evening, happy return from spring break. I'm Angela Alvarez. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of New Initiatives, and I'm joined by.
Good evening. I'm Trevor Roberts. I'm a specialist in the Office of New Initiatives.
Trevor's going to walk us through two waiver requests that we have.
Just trying to get this up full screen. So tonight we're going to be looking at some waiver requests and also a location request from charter schools. And if you give me just one moment, I will pull it up. Okay, thank you. So tonight's presentation aligns with board priority 5 and 6. When we receive waiver requests, we have a process we put them through. So the requests are submitted to the Office of New Initiatives. We determine whether the requests meet established guidelines. We vet the requests with key departments and share them with the Charter and Operator-led Schools Advisory Board to get their input. Tonight, we're presenting these requests to the board, and we will be asking the board to vote on these requests on May 23rd at the public board meeting. Some key considerations that we have for waiver requests are the evidence that the school presents of demand for the request, the school's rationale about how the requests meets the school need, evidence of how stakeholders were involved in vetting and approving the request, the quality of the programming offered by the school, and the school's capacity to implement. The first request we're going to be looking at is an enrollment request coming from KIPP Harmony Academy. The school is a pre-K through or K through 8, and their request is to reduce their enrollment capacity from their current cap of 1,572 down to 1,368 for next year. Just a note, the school contract runs through the 23-24 school year. They will be going through the renewal process, and pending the outcome of that process, the capacity would remain at 1,368 into the next contract term. So the school's rationale for this is that they want to have fewer students so they can make smaller class sizes, increase chances for small group instruction and differentiated learning opportunities, and increase collaborative planning time for instructional staff. The school does believe that they can maintain current staffing levels with the lower student enrollment. And in terms of the evidence they provided evidence that this enrollment level was developed through conversations with stakeholders during a working group that includes families and staff representatives from the school. And they engage an educational consultant to do the community engagement and analysis around the budgeting and the planning to determine the appropriate size for this request.
So when we bring this back in May, we will share like our recommendations and further considerations. So this is just for information today. One thing to note is that their current enrollment is close to the requested deduction. So it wouldn't be a drop of 200 actual students in terms of who's within the building. And it would align with how many kids, adjusting how many kids they take from the lottery for the upcoming school year. So just wanted to make sure that those things were known, but we'll discuss that in more detail in May. So we're just for information, giving you kind of a high level, but we'll go into more nitty gritty when we bring it back.
The next request is a facility location request. This request, well, first of all, when we get facility location requests, we do have some other considerations that we do look at. We look at schools' plans for renovation and financing of a facility. We look at the detailed timeline that the school submits for making sure the building will be ready in time to take students.
Trevor, give us 1 second. I see some folks mentioning, saying that they're watching. I don't know if this will be impacted by IT. They're watching on YouTube and the sound has cut out for the presentation. Just want to make sure that everyone is still capturing the presentation. I'm not sure if we can, if someone can confirm for us. Can you all hear via YouTube
Yes,
or?
we can hear the presentation through Teams.
Commissioner McFadden, this is CIO Jones. I am listening and hearing things, but it is cutting out. So
Do we have a staff person monitoring YouTube? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Just want to make sure everyone is able to hear the information. Okay, so they let us know that they're working on the volume. It's just a little low. If you want to try turning up the volume to see if that helps, just let us know so we can make sure that everyone is able to hear. They're saying that there's still no sound on the YouTube stream. Anyone have a song on their heart? You are Chief of Information and Technology. Just let us know that it's a equipment issue across a couple of platforms, so they're working on addressing it. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Right, okay, we're just talking. We're recording this. And so if you're in the public and not able to hear, we're gonna, if you're not able to hear, the volume is working on Teams. So if you want to join the meeting via that link, feel free to do that. Also, we're recording these and we will make the recording of the meeting available via our website. So we're going to have our staff continue with their presentation.
Thank you. Just picking up some additional considerations for location requests. Again, plans of renovation and financing for the facility, detailed timeline for building readiness, a recruitment enrollment strategy that shows that this school can fill the space that they are renovating, a transportation plan for students, and evidence of community engagement. So this request comes from Clay Hill Public Charter School. Their request is to make their current facility, the Our Lady of Fatima building, their long-term facility. The school is in its first contract and is opened as a K-3, and they're expanding year by year to become a K-8 at full capacity. 2 years ago, the school received a temporary approval for its current facility, again, the Our Lady of Fatima building. The reason it was a temporary approval at the time is because based on the original lease that the school signed, they did not have control of the full building. And so the floor space that they did have control of would not be able to fit students at the school's full expansion. So the school is now coming back to request approval of the building as their permanent facility. They are currently in negotiations for a lease extension that would give them control over the full building, which would allow space for students at full expansion. They expect this lease to be finalized sometime this spring before the board votes in May. They have provided a letter of commitment from their landlord, which shows that it is the landlord's intent to finalize the lease with the school and to provide the full floor space for the school. They have provided construction, financing, and enrollment plans, as well as engagement efforts for their current students or current families, and letters of support, which we are currently under review and will be bringing our final recommendation in front of the board in May.
And so when we come back, we'll talk about full considerations. There are things like, are they going to have making sure they have AC, because we're under an AC plan. So that's part of the review, making sure that the shared spaces are large enough for the school at capacity. So that's some of the improvements that are part of their planned construction that they're doing in the building. So we'll bring back all those considerations when you ask, when we bring the full request for you to vote on whether or not to make this their permanent facility.
And just a reminder on timeline. So we're presenting this for information tonight. We'll continue to vet the requests and provide recommendations to the board in May, and the board will be voting on May 23rd at the public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions from the board? All right, thank you all. Thank you very much. Okay. I will now review the consent agenda. Board colleagues, please let me know if you would like an item removed, and please state your question for staff. I am pulling item 8.01 so that the student commissioner can vote. 8.01, this is the data retention, ADHEHB, data retention and JRA, maintenance and release of student records, second reader. Were there questions? I'm pulling it for vote, but were there questions? Okay, thank you. 15.01, Office Depot, Inc. And that's it. That's a short consent agenda. All right, let's move to public comment. Do we have Jessica with us? Okay. We will now move to public comment. Speakers from recognized groups will have 5 minutes to speak. So first, we have Jocelyn Providence representing the Baltimore Teachers Union.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can't hear you yet.
No? Okay.
No.
Testing, testing. Can anyone hear me? No? Oh, okay. So, looks like, can you hear me, Board Chair
We can't hear.
Richardson?
Jocelyn,
It looks like people in the
you
chat can hear me.
they can, you're heard on Teams, but we can't hear you in this room.
Okay.
I wonder if they put the captions on.
I thought we gave you 250. I knew you were thinking it. Jocelyn, can you hear us?
Yes.
You can hear us. Did you prepare this in writing? And if so, could you email it to us and then we can read it?
Oh, I can type. I'll type it.
Oh, hold on. We're going to try a thing.
Okay.
Hey, Jocelyn, could you speak for us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I hear a big echo. I don't. Okay, all right, but you can hear me. Okay, all right, I see a thumbs up. Okay, I apologize for my dog. All right, I'm going to start now. Sorry. Okay. All right, good evening. My name is Jocelyn Providence, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the Baltimore Teachers Union. I hope everyone had a good and restful spring break. I know throughout the entire school district, every person, whether working inside a school building or in district office, needed a break, needed a pause. The break was needed because there is so much going on that is affecting the lives of our students, school staff, and many of our families. Some of it is systemic issues that we continue to battle within our schools and our city, but some of it is preventable. And as the Baltimore Teachers Union continues to negotiate for sustainable and effective improvements to our teacher contract, we hope that the school board and Baltimore City Public School District leaders listen to what could improve our schools and make sure that all of our teachers have sustainable careers that value us and our students. A few ways that I would like to highlight are: one, allowing teachers to be paid for the many hours that we are asked, voluntold, or sometimes even forced to cover classes during our planning periods, or combine already large classes into huge classes of sometimes over 40+ students. Other school districts in Maryland do this. Why doesn't BCPSS value our teachers the same way. 2, allowing the very minimal number of families of teachers who are married to other Baltimore City teachers to be able to take their maternity, paternity, or family leave together, or bare minimum, allow them to get their federally allotted 30 days. Currently, the system forces families to split the 30 days amongst both parents. I have personally experienced this, and I think that it's very questionable that district leadership has chosen to not allow their own employees to have their federally allotted 30 days each to be with their new addition to their family. If we believe that our teachers are valuable, then we should be treated and respected like it. Another thing that I would like to discuss with the school board is the lack of transparency around scheduling for the school district. It seems like maybe it'll be talked about tonight. Yes, every school has someone who is their master planner and scheduler that puts together the schedules of the school, excuse me. But we, the teachers, are the people who are delivering instruction day in and day out and should be informed about decisions and discussions involving scheduling. As the people who are delivering the instruction every day, we should be treated like experts in best practices, scheduling, and instruction that we are, not like an afterthought in decision-making process. When were students, teachers, families, or even the public informed about high school schedule changes for next year? Next school year, district leadership has determined that all high schools need to create schedules with A, B day schedules with 4 periods of 85-minute classes. As a math teacher, I will speak in the context of STEM. This means that instead of a full year of geometry, algebra 2, pre-calc, or even biology, this would now be a half of a school year instead. The high school subjects that will prepare our students for STEM careers and tests like the SAT that many colleges still require, our students will receive less instructional time to prepare for them. I would think after the outcry of desire for more feedback around huge scheduling shifts, like the changes made last year for the start to end times, district leadership would be more proactive about informing us and getting feedback. In the BCPSS High School Scheduling Guidance 23-24 document on page 5, there is planning training timeline, and nowhere on this page does it say when teachers or the public will be notified. The closest thing that I saw is that in August, tentative teacher schedules will be distributed with student schedules. Where is the transparency with students and teachers to know how to prepare for the upcoming school year? People who are not currently in the instructional role might think this is a simple switch from a traditional schedule, but it's not. With block schedules, you have to incorporate in how to make sure students are getting the additional supports when they don't see their teacher every day. And also switching a full year class to a semester is also not easy switch. You might think that increasing the allotted time from 60 to 70 or to 85 minutes, would increase productivity, but that is not always the case. And mathematically, when we are switching to half the year of 85 minutes, that is less instructional time. When are students and teachers going to have their input heard? I also find it very ironic that 2 of the categories that is listed in this guide is, quote, consistent and equitable. Changing schedules again after schedules were just changed last year and a few years before that and a few years before that is not consistent, and equity is providing what everyone needs to be successful. Equality is treating everyone the same. Giving every single school, high school, the same mandated schedule is treating us all the same, not equity. All in all, I again, like I have done many times, am begging you, school board, to ensure Baltimore City School District leadership is engaging and receiving feedback from stakeholders on these important issues and topics, because it's not happening enough. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I want to now turn it over to our administrative assistant for public comment.
Thank you, Chair Richardson. There were no other submissions for public comment tonight.
Okay, thank you. I want to go to the pulled item 8.01. Is there a motion to approve item 8.01?
So moved, Katsogby.
Thank you, Commissioner Katsogby. Is there a second?
Second, Commissioner Sally.
Thank you, Commissioner Sally. All in favor? Commissioner McFadden?
Yes.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes.
Commissioner Coy?
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito?
Yes.
Commissioner Katzogby?
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Sally?
Yes.
Commissioner Slater Harrington?
Yes.
And I am in favor. That motion passes with 10 in favor and 2 absent. Is there a motion to approve the remaining consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Is there a second?
Second, Kenyatta Bay.
Thank you, Commissioner Kenyatta Bay. All in favor? Commissioner McFadden?
Yes.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes.
Commissioner Coy?
Yes.
Commissioner Esposito?
Yes.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Sally?
What's the
Yes.
matter?
Nothing. Commissioner Slater Harrington?
Yes. I'm okay.
For the record, my response was yes, not what's the matter?
I'm sorry, that was funny. Commissioner Sally, you said yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
you.
Commissioner Slater Harrington? And I am in favor. That motion passes with 9 in favor and 2 absent. We will now hear a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer, Chris Doherty, on the 23-24 fiscal budget.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Chris Doherty, Head of the Finance Office, and I am here with some of my colleagues to make the presentation of the initial 23-24 preliminary budget. And as this touches on all aspects of what we do, consider this as aligned with all 7 of the board priorities, in keeping with our procedure of mentioning that up front. Also, to try to give a little bit of framing for both this presentation, the board book that follows, and discussions that will be part and parcel of that, as Board Chair Richardson has indicated in her opening remarks. There are a lot of moving parts, certainly in any budget. And one way to start getting our collective heads around it is to think of this as, importantly, the second full year of Kirwan. The year we're in, of course, FY23 was the first full year of Kirwan, and next year, FY24, is importantly the second full year of Kirwan. The Kirwan funding is phased in over time, and this year from 23 to 24, we're seeing a 6% increase from the year we're in to next year's proposed budget. I think you'll all recall that in the first full year of our presentation, the first full year of Kirwan, we got a 20% bump. And that was quite a dramatic bump and much discussed. This year is considerably lower, so the increase is 6%. And as soon as we say Kirwan, it's important to emphasize what Kirwan is not. Yes, it is bringing new funds to the schools, but it is certainly not a blank check. The Kirwan funds come with a whole host of new requirements and restrictions. And while these resources are acutely needed and appreciated, let's face it, they do not in and of themselves rectify decades of underinvestment in Baltimore City schools. So we are certainly putting all these funds to good use as we have in this first year, but it is also important to point out that we're still experiencing, for 2 major examples, underages in both our special education funding and our pre-K funding. That is to say that the costs that we incur executing special education services and our pre-K are less than the categorical funds that Kirwan is giving us. And yes, they are increasing, but they're not phased in until the end. So we just think that's worth pointing out. With that in mind, we are very happy to be presenting you with this preliminary FY24 budget. It is informed, as we will elaborate on, by months of input from stakeholders, and it aims quite directly to continue to support both the academic and non-academic needs of our students. It is firmly founded on our existing blueprint for success, which the pillars of which are literacy and academics, wholeness, and leadership. And you'll see that also connected to the 3 Rs. And looking mainly also at the categories that we heard from the community forums and from board members. So this presentation will give that preliminary overview of our planned 24 spend. You'll be hearing from Acting Budget Director Courtney Desabey and Chiefs Perkins Cohen, Chief Davis, and Chief Dabrowski. Thank you very much.
All right. Courtney Desabey, Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer. I'm going to try to do this while navigating through the slides and remember what it's like to present in person in front of you guys I haven't seen in a while. So this first slide talks a little bit.
Courtney.
It's good to see you, Commissioner McFadden.
And all of you, really, we rarely see you.
I know.
all, so.
I have a lot more gray now than the last time I was sitting here. So mostly due to the budget. Anyway, this first slide talks a little bit about our timeline, and we did make a few tweaks this year. You guys know one of the things that we always talk about are iterative improvements on the process. Starting in December, we have our community feedback sessions. Those were ones that we started a few years back, of course, with the premise of, waiting till April to get community input is too late. So we started with those meetings in December. We had 4 meetings split into different categories. We had our student-led meeting. Our student commissioner participated in that. That might have been like his first week, I think, on duty, where we roped him in on that, as well as our ASCBC partners. So we had some student input from that meeting. We had a meeting that engaged our community partnership groups. So like PCAP hosted the meeting and we had some other groups attend as well. We had a general meeting and then we had our multicultural meeting. So this was our actual first in-person one that we've done in a few years. It was actually good to have another in-person meeting there for the community engagement as well. For that multi-language meeting, we had translation in French, Spanish, we had Tigrinya, we had Swahili. So we are translating the presentations in the languages for folks to be able to hear real time what the folks were saying. We're also taking their feedback in their native language and incorporating it back into the survey presentation as well. So that's where we start in terms of the feedback on the process. We also had changed a little bit of this portion of the timeline. So on the back end here where we engage you, the board, and the commissioners. So normally we have about a 2 or 3 week period between the initial presentation and the vote. And we wanted to make sure that we maximize that period of time. So a couple adjustments. One, we're making sure that we have the board forum next week, the week right after the presentation instead of like the week before the vote. So there's a little bit more time between when we get the community feedback and when you have to give your decision. Also, we're having our, meetings with the board, to talk through some of the materials and digging on your individual questions during this week. We're rolling out the draft version of the budget book on Monday, so you'll see it prior to the forum on Tuesday, so you actually have something to reference a little bit. So this first presentation is starting the conversation, but it's not ending the conversation by any means. So we're looking forward to kind of having some more interaction and finalizing for the vote in May. So that's where we are with the timeline. So I mentioned the community feedback and the forums that we had. We did the surveys. We've learned a few things over the years with regards to the surveys. One of the things is, you want to make sure when you're surveying folks with regards to this sort of information that you're explaining it in a way that's relative to what it is that they're looking for and what they understand. We used to have versions of this where we had 20, 30 different priority areas. And, it's very unwieldy and not everything holds the same amount of weight. So there's a conscious effort over the last 2 years to pare it down to these specific items. And also to make sure that, as we've said, in prior years, that we're not putting anything in front of folks that we're not willing to actually do. So as we get feedback on items, a lot of these things you're going to see, some of them are continuations from prior years. So, continuing to invest, building on the investments, but we're also emphasizing based on the feedback they receive, sort of the nuance of how those dollars get spent and what gets added on. So what you see here is the ranking essentially of the feedback from the community members. Mental health supports being number 1, culture and climate, et cetera. So you guys experienced a similar survey where you asked, sort of rank the priorities based on your order of importance. So that's what we asked the community to do. And the ranking is, pretty similar or in line with what we expected to see. Now I'm going to be turning it over to our Chief of Staff.
Thanks, Courtney. So
first, we just want to talk about, so in addition to all the work that Courtney just outlined in terms of how we engage our community and our students around our budget, we also want to make sure it reflects our values and our priorities. So this budget you'll see is aligned with our blueprint for success that we drafted at the beginning of Dr. Santelises' tenure as a CEO. And so we're continuing that to be our kind of our anchor in terms of how we organize ourselves and prioritize what we think is most important to invest in. In addition, it reflects our ongoing commitment to equity. You heard tonight about the recognition of Dr. Durant for her tremendous expertise in this area. I think of the 23 or 28 they set across the state, if they ranked them, I assumed ours would be the highest ranked, our equity officer, because Tracy is so excellent at what she does. And so the thread of her work goes through everything that we do, and its ongoing commitment to all the investments that we're making in young people. So this next part is new. We're trying to do a little more dynamic presentation. So you'll see these slides start to move in a second here through all the many great things that happened in the last year that have benefited our students. So a couple of them I'm just going to call out that as we flip through these successes, that 50% of our students in our own homegrown district tutoring program moved out of well below basic as a result of their tutoring. 65% of the students in the district's pre-K program tested ready for kindergarten, and our AP expansion work is another one I want to call out. So we've seen an 83% increase in the number of AP seats available across the district, and also a percentage increase in the percentage of Black and Brown students taking advantage of those seats. So now 84% of our ESOL and our Latino and African American students are benefiting from those seats. Again, another dynamic slide here kind of showing some of the other critical work that we're doing and other successes that we can point to. So Dr. Santelises talked about the last week's win by the Mervo Regional Kid Wind STEM team in the STEM Challenge. They took first, second, and third place in that challenge. We also see students winning in writing and arts awards in prestigious competitions. We see Polly's volleyball team winning the championship, as well as Dunbar's soccer team. We have debate teams winning and qualifying for national competitions. And we last week got to see the city mock trial team that is winning and beating the undefeated Gilman team. And then I think many of us have been enjoying on social media the celebrating in the students being admitted to schools across a range of schools across the country and their highest priority schools that they wanted to get in. So these are just some of the images from our students benefiting from and getting into these these exciting moments when they get the acceptance into the school of their choice. And of course, students graduating from school, students being successful, finding post-graduation options that they're excited about. This is what we're all here for. And so really appreciate the chance to show these moments. And our student commissioners recognizing some of these students. So that's great. So then I also just want to talk about some of the other investments we're making this year are about our commitment to kind of improving the way that we're providing services and supporting our schools. We, as many people know, prior to Kirwan, experienced many years of very, very tight and reductions in budgets where we had to make very difficult choices and cut programming, or what we always tried to do was protect programming and protect schools, but took a lot of cuts in the central office. And so one of our commitments this year is to make sure that we're putting some of those resources back to improve the services to schools, improve the services to teachers. I mean, an example is, our accounts payable office is an office that has been very, very small. It was cut back during some of those cuts. It's not the size it needed to be even then, but now certainly as we're starting to see some of the investments through Kirwan and some of the ESSER dollars, there's a lot of more work flowing through that office, and the size of that office again was small for much leaner budgets, and we now need to make investments so that people can use the resources that they have before them to invest in our young people. So those are the kinds of opportunities we're trying to make sure we're investing in to make sure that we're responsive to the needs of our young people. And then community, again, we're really committed to working to make sure that we're investing in our communities and connecting with our communities, that we're partnering with local businesses, that we're partnering and lifting up local business owners, as well as that we're partnering with organizations who can benefit our schools, that we're leveraging philanthropic partnerships or business partnerships to fill gaps that still exist in our schools. Again, this is influx we're seeing in Kerwin resources is long overdue. There remain a number of gaps that Chief Doherty talked about in the beginning. So we still very much need to work with our community and very much want to work with our community to build partnerships. And then, of course, our community schools work has been hailed as some of the nationally been recognized as some of the work that's kind of very ahead of many other districts in terms of what we're doing with community schools. So we want those partnerships are important to us, and you'll continue to see those investments in this budget. And now I think I'm turning it back to Courtney.
All right, so I'm going to get a little bit into some of the numbers. So we're going to start a little bit with our funding sources. So our main funding sources for the budget are Kerwin, of course, which we've spoken a little bit about. And we also have our grants and ESSER funds, and we're going to dig in on a bit of those. But one of the themes that you're going to see as we discuss and we show some of the priorities is what we're calling braiding. So essentially using funding from the different sources, as they can be used and as they can be applied. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ESSER grants and using grants as they expire and how good we've been in terms of using up the amounts that we have in our grants as well. So some of the information is going to be specific to, tied to what you're going to see in the budget book. But again, the theme is going to be really allocations from all the different sources that we have funding available. So Kerwin, as Chief Doherty mentioned, FY24 marks the second full year of Kerwin. So it's a 6.3% increase as opposed to the 20% increase we had from 22 to 23. We're going to continue to see some growth from Kerwin from our local and state additions as we grow within Kerwin. We have a sense from the Kerwin legislation of exactly which categories are going to change and how they're going to change. But of course, a lot of that is still dependent on enrollment and how enrollment factors into the individual categories. So besides Kerwin and the $1.51 billion that we received through there, we also have additional restricted grants and funds that add to our total revenue. So this slide highlights the different Kerwin funding categories. And as we've said in other presentations, it's not a blank check. It's very specific in terms of how we receive the funding and how the funding can be used. So the largest bucket of funding is foundation at $617 million, and then compensatory concentrations of poverty. And now the way that this funding, I want to make sure that you kind of understand some of the numbers that we tie together. Like in some places, you're going to see the total budget as 1.5. Or other places you're going to see it as 1.4. So the difference is what's included or what's not included. So here, for example, in terms of the Kerwin dollars can include both general fund and grants. So there's some Kerwin dollars that we have that we treat as grants. So that would look different from our general fund number. Also, Kerwin also incorporates dollars that we get both from the state and from the city of Baltimore. So there are other areas where we would look at maybe just state funding or local funding, for example. So we try to make sure we explain, exactly what source it is or what it's showing. But that would explain also why you might look at this slide, and I'm going to show you the next one. It's going to say 1.4 instead of 1.5. So here, our revenue by type. So this breaks down the types of revenue that we get, categories being general fund, restricted, and our enterprise funds. So as I mentioned, the Kerwin dollars fall into the two first categories, which are general and restricted funds. But those aren't the only restricted funds. We also get things like Title I, which fall into that restricted fund category. The enterprise funds are federally reimbursed funds, so specifically our food service funds that we get paid back for. So in addition to these restricted funds, we also have other funds that we don't receive within this year, but we can still spend within this year. So an example of that is a major example, our ESSER 3, our ARP funds. So fiscal year 24 is not the year that we got it in. So you don't see it in terms of the revenue number. We got it actually in 21 and 22, but we can still spend that money. And we'll show you that, through the presentation in the budget book as well as we kind of go through. This side breaks up our revenue by source for our general fund. So of that $1.4 billion in general fund, as I mentioned, there's a portion that comes from the state, there's a portion that comes from the city, and we also have a portion that we call other, which is mainly made up of some of our federal sources, such as E-rate reimbursements and our investment earnings. So it's a small portion, and not to be confused with the federal dollars that we get from our enterprise reimbursements. All right. ESSER funds. So as I mentioned, our ESSER dollars are one-time grant that we were awarded under the American Rescue Plan, and they've been used for a number of expenses. And the parameters for the different grants are slightly different, but in general, they're considered one-time costs or things that we have a plan in place for continuity of service. We've mentioned before, particularly last year when we're developing the budget, about any impending cliffs from grants expiring and Kerwin, coming on board. So we've been very thoughtful in terms of how we kind of leverage those things, one and the other. Knowing that we're escalating on Kerwin and moving things, particularly from grants that are short-term back onto long-term operational budgets, is also part of our goal as we go through the process. There are certain things, of course, that are one-time, and then those are the things that we try to focus on funding through Kerwin and through the grants. Now, as I mentioned, the grants can show up in 1 year as revenue that we receive, but we still have an extended period of time in which we can spend. So the last of these ESSER grants, the major ones, is ESSER 3, ARP, which doesn't expire, or we can obligate funds up till September 30th, 2024. So you're going to see some of that being used in this budget as we develop as well. So these are 3 of the major COVID grants. Altogether, we have about 29 grants. Outside of the big ESSER grants, we had 17 grants. Well, altogether, I should say, we had 17 grants that were fully expended. So we expended 97.7, so about 98% of those grants. The one that wasn't fully expended, the 16 of the 17 were fully expended. The one that wasn't was really because of supply chain issues, so not because of a lack of effort on our part to spend every dollar that we get. But highlighting ESSER and CARES, so the first ESSER grant, which was 48 million, we spent 100% of that. ESSER 2, we're at 90, and this is data is as of 2 weeks ago, so March 27th, so it's as current as we could make it in here. So we expended 94% of the 197 million, and then for ESSER 3, either spent or encumbered so far, we have 22%. And again, what we're doing in fiscal year 24 is going to be using up portions of that as well. Like I said, we have until September 30th to obligate as much of that as we can, and we'll be using every penny. All right. So as I mentioned before, braiding, so using funding from different sources. So some of the things that you're going to see, contrary to how we've shown things in prior years where it was kind of like just general funds, like a lot of things are going to be showing the combined sources. So we're going to be showing you the dollar amounts, regardless of what the funding source is, so you can get a sense of the scope of the investment. So that's what we're referring to when we're talking about braiding. And we picked out a nice example. It's a pretty big one because it's tutoring and it's 25 million. So it's a big dollar amount. But as an example, we kind of bulleted out, what some of the different funding sources are that contribute towards that 25 million for tutoring. So we have the ARP ESSER funds, 5 million. We have Title I, 2 million. ARP tutoring 13.6, the transition supplemental, which is actually part of the Kerwin funding that we receive, and the ARP TSI grants. So these are different fund sources, and based on what's allowed and how they can be used, we're very meticulous in making sure that we apply the right portions to the right expenditures. So braid together the amount that we need for the investment. All right, so this slide talks a little bit about some of our position changes for fiscal year 24. So as was mentioned, there's been a concerted effort to reinvest from the prior years of cuts. Some of us will remember the budgets in fiscal years 17, 18, 19, some of the major cuts that we had to do. Dr. Santelises, I know when you first came in and you kind of looked around, what it was that you had to deal with, the magnitude of the effort and the support that we had to deal with it from certain avenues was tremendous. So we're recovering from some of that. And a lot of what we did, and you remember Commissioner McFadden, a lot of that what we did was really trying to preserve schools as much as possible. So we made a lot of cuts to central office. We took on a lot of duties and extra roles in central office. And now with Kerwin funding, a lot of the funding is specifically directed towards schools. So we're making sure that we're trying to address everything that needs to be done. But also in year 2 of Kerwin, knowing a little bit more than what we did last year, we're getting a better sense of how things can be applied, where they can be applied, making sure that we're porting things appropriately, because that's going to be a major part of Kerwin moving forward as well. So we're trying to build a foundation for that. And some of that is right-sizing how our positions look and appear. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just in general, we have an increase of 612 FTEs across the district. So that's between schools and central. And on one of the next slides, I'll kind of talk a little bit about this, but we've discussed this concept before of, stuff being in district office, being not just district office, but central supports for schools. So we broke out here both the school-based positions and then for central office, the ones that are district office based, and then also the ones where at least 80% of the time is spent, focused on schools. And for the increases that you see for the district office positions, a lot of that is are programs that are specifically designed around supporting schools. Like the biggest chunk of that is in operations, for example, where we're strategically making the decision to create more in-house positions for maintenance. We know a lot of the expenditures that we have to external contractors are for maintenance and repairs. Having them in-house improves our responsiveness, improves our cost effectiveness. We have more control over the work that can be done, when it can be done, and also what can be charged, as well as we have more direct oversight on the quality of the work that's being done. So, that's a strategic decision that we're making while we have the opportunity and a chance to do so, to sort of build our budget in that direction that will sustain us better off long term. So these next two slides, we talk a little bit about the distribution of the budget. So this is our essential, budget overview, where the money goes type of look. And this is for our general fund. So we look at the amount of the budget that's principal control. So that's what goes, directly to schools. Principals have oversight. And this does include, locked positions that are at schools as well. So that's 74% of our budget. The next major category, the 14%, are part of that bucket where I was discussing. It's funded in central office, but it supports schools. So it's a lot of positions and OTPS, other than personnel dollars, that support schools. The next slide is going to break out some of that. But the combined percentage for those two is 88%. We always compare that, and we look at it every year to kind of look at a margin in terms of how we're moving and allocating our resources. So it's actually 1% higher than what it was last year. We were at 87% last year, but it's been fairly consistent the last 2 or 3 years. So this next slide breaks out those central school supports. So the biggest chunk, easy to see, transportation, fairly straightforward. Our utilities budget went up slightly because of expected utility rates. In the buckets that are labeled COO non-admin, that is our operations, maintenance expenditures. So some of the same items I was discussing, that we're trying to hire more staff to replace those positions. So a lot of our contractual positions. In the CAO contracts, we have a lot of the contracts that are related services in the academics offices. So that's what makes up a chunk of that. We see athletics is there as well, our non-public costs, et cetera. Next, I'm going to be turning it over to Chiefs Davis and Dabrowski.
So good evening. Chief Davis and I are going to walk through some of the investment highlights. I want to just share from the outset, this is not an exhaustive list. This is truly some highlights. And I think as we go further into our process tonight and into next week, the details of many of these pieces will be lifted up. But tonight, John and I will talk a bit about what we'll see in academics, specifically around programs and supports in literacy and mathematics, curriculum and instruction, our commitments in secondary success and innovation, some of our leadership priorities, particularly in coaching and professional learning, and recruitment and retention. We'll follow up with some information around our wholeness investments, mental health, student support services, athletics, and enrichment. And then we do want to lift up some key investments in infrastructure related to improved services and some work in facilities. So we'll go to the next slide. So I want to lift up something we've already talked a little bit about tonight already, which is our tutoring work, which really does, I think, show the commitment we continue to make in literacy and mathematics to ensure that our students are getting what they need in areas of both math and literacy. And again, helping them to catch up on lost learning and work that needs to be prioritized. So again, an investment of $25 million. Our personalized learning work, which includes the continued investment in high quality instructional materials in both our math and literacy work, particularly in these high quality online platforms. So when we talk about things such as Amplify, iReady, we talk about our work with Zearn and with Imagine Math Achieve 3000. These investments continue to be prioritized for, again, you can see that amount of over $6 million. We will continue the great work that's been occurring in extended learning opportunities, both with our after school and before school programs and our summer. Again, while we certainly partner for enrichments around these, math and literacy continue to be prioritized in these opportunities. And again, you can see our investment of over $45 million for these areas. We go to the next slide. We're excited that as part of our work in pre-K, we highlighted earlier some of the great things we already see where our youngest learners come ready to learn. We want to prioritize an opportunity for new curriculum and to do the work of investigating and deciding and procuring that for a 24-25 launch. So using next year to do that thoughtful strategic planning for pre-K. And again, our work in the fine arts realm, again, wanting to make sure that our schools are prioritizing funds so that we can have fine arts offerings in more and more of our schools. And again, you can see those investments there, 1.5 million for pre-K and 1.9 million for our fine arts work. We're excited as a part of the fiscal 24 budget to really be thinking about our work in high schools under the umbrella of secondary success and innovation. So when we think about how we want to set up our students, our high school students for success, we think particularly about that 9th grade year and the importance of it. So as part of this school year 23-24, we've asked every one of our high schools to budget for a 9th grade coordinator to really ensure that those 9th graders are fully supported to stay on track as they begin that high school career. You can see that investment of $3.7 million. We want to make sure that our CTE work continues to expand and evolve based on the great strategic planning that has occurred over the last 4 or 5 years with CTE. So you'll see again an example here of our investment to expand our nursing career programs, our technology, along with an HVAC program in the CTE space, an investment of $1.6 million. And then again, as we continue to think about post-secondary success, we are making sure that every high school budgets for a post-secondary advisor. So again, helping our young people be sure that they're being supported along that journey for those important post-secondary decisions. We go to the next piece here, you're going to see this space around leadership. And so we're very, very excited that the work we've been doing under our blueprint, particularly around literacy coaching in a subset of schools, we are actually expanding and asked all of our schools to budget for a full-time literacy coach, as well as if schools who are ready to take on both literacy and math coaches, knowing the important work that's out there for our math improvement. Again, an investment of over $10 million to really grow those math and literacy leaders at the school level to ensure that our teachers receive regular ongoing support in their schools. Professional development is also going to be a key lever for us as we think about, again, developing our teachers, supporting our teacher leaders so that we can do, again, the work that's important for that math and literacy space. We are also investing a lot of dollars in our new teacher induction supports, mentoring to ensure that our teachers who come to city schools are supported throughout their early years. We know that teachers make decisions about whether or not they will stay in the field in those first few years. So we want to really wrap around those new teachers and ensure they have what they need in order to be successful. And then you'll also see an important space around recruitment and retention. Again, hiring additional staff to support how we make sure we're processing those teacher certifications and faster service for our teachers. So we've heard this is feedback we've had from our community. So again, you can see the respective investments we are making there. And at this point, I will turn it over to Chief Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Dabrowski, and good evening, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about wholeness now. And I'm going to start this off by bringing up an investment that we're making in the upcoming year around a centrally supported team of mental health services that's really around crisis support. It is really around prevention and then a healing-centered approach afterwards. The prevention really will come down to peer mediation, helping schools when there is some type of escalation, but then on the back end as well, ensuring that we have the right supports when the healing has to go on in our school communities. For the second investment you see there, before we talk about expanded school behavioral health, I want to make sure the public is reminded about the fact that we have always ensured that there is a social worker, a clinician in every single school building. Sometimes we get asked that question, and that is the first kind of layer of mental health supports that we have in our schools. But the second one is through our expanded school behavioral health program. In the last year alone, we've added 2 community partners to the group that are in schools and that provide additional clinicians, usually social workers or psychologists. And together that investment can get up to $7 million. The last one is really around morning meetings and advisory that we have in every one of our schools. This is a big part of relationship building. It allows teachers to have that time, and it's focused on social emotional learning. It's also focused on some college and career readiness. But together, those are the first investments we're going to highlight around wholeness. Let's keep going. And then one aspect that gets very little, that never gets highlighted, honestly, is the work that our re-engagement center does. Our re-engagement center works with students that sometimes come in because maybe they have dropped out and they want to get back into school. Sometimes they're referred by schools so that they might have a change in program. But in this particular case, we're paying special attention to students that come out of juvenile services. Those are students that need mentoring, and we have worked to provide some mentoring this year with the resources that we have, but we're going to expand upon that next year. We're going to expand upon it by hiring a manager and then also having more funds to work with some community-based organizations. Again, that's work that goes behind the scenes, but it is a lot of real mentoring work that goes on with our young people. We always have home visits. The home visits are also with the re-engagement center. And it is a combination, though, between our re-engagement center and our attendance team. It goes into a little bit of family case management when we need to. But again, we use partners for that work, but it is a significant investment. And then lastly, you can see our homeless supports that we have. A lot of it is for summer programming, but it's also for uniforms and resources that families need. Let's keep going. Athletics. I want to call myself out for missing something that should have been highlighted, which is really middle school sports. This past year, we increased the budget for middle school sports such that there are more opportunities for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Specifically, there are camps that we have created. There are end of season events that we've created, but we're going to push that even farther next year and have competitive teams on the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade levels. And again, Dr. Santelises has been very clear about working to bring this back. We should have called that out there, and I just want to verbally make sure we call that out. Additionally, we're going to work very hard to hire trainers this year. I say work very hard because I want to be very honest with everyone in the room and everyone watching that we've been getting into this for the last 6 months and have tried to work with some organizations such as MedStar to get trainers on board, but they're really hard to find right now. Regardless, though, we're budgeting for the positions. That's something we have not had in our athletic program before, and we're going to work really hard to get them on board and to support our student athletes. You can see a couple more investments that really come out of the concentrations of poverty funds. They really speak to monies that are set aside for athletics on the school level and also for enrichment and extracurricular programming. Some of this has to do with some after school opportunities, but in the end, schools put that aside as part of the budget to make sure that we can account for those needs. I want to talk a little bit about, some investments around facilities for just a minute. We are going to upgrade some of our health suites, and you can see that we are adding $6.8 million for that. We will continue to change our air filters. We've done that at an increased rate once COVID hit. And then you can also see an additional investment around some of our maintenance workers. Really, it's at our schools to make sure that a lot of this is taken out of principals' plates. I want to call out facilities not just for the facilities and the maintenance that has to happen in our schools, but also for thinking about what they can provide to our school leaders so that they're not having to track every single thing that is maintenance wise. That's a big deal. And I think we all try to do that as leaders, but I think facilities has worked really hard in the past 6 months to get to the point of doing that. And lastly, a couple of infrastructure investments. You can see the first one is really around an enrollment system. And that is something that I know Chief Hubbard has been pushing really hard on to really make sure our first time enrollment for middle and high school choice is smoother. A second investment you can see is around ITD. Maybe it was quite telling at the beginning that yes, having that investment makes a little bit of sense. But those are infrastructure investments that you can see that really align, even though there might not be direct things that schools see, families will eventually see this and how smooth our enrollment system is and also how tight our ITD systems can be.
I think we're wrapping up with the first part of this presentation, and as we look to remind you of the next steps, starting, well, not just starting, but this phase of the presentation opens up an increased chapter of feedback, both in the sessions that were discussed earlier and also with the upcoming release of the board book itself, and then the school budget forum, and then the real home stretch really being April 18th to May 9th, all leading up to the May 9th vote. One other thing that we wanted to point out was we got feedback in the past that sometimes the budget presentations and the board books were too dry, and that there were lots of tables and lots of, it was dry. And we tried to take that feedback to heart because after all, yes, a budget is unavoidably a bunch of numbers, and you do compare those numbers to what came in the past. Some of that is absolutely necessary, but we took the advice to heart that this is about kids, and it's about people, and it's about the activities that will happen with these funds. And so with big help from the communications office, that's some of what informed this style of presentation and what you'll see as well in the board book. The board book will have a lot more details, and yes, it will have tables, but we're trying to do better at capturing the human element behind those numbers. And that's feedback that we appreciated and that we took. And with that, I think that's our last slide. Thank you.
I just want
Kevin,
to
question?
thank the team as we dive into questions for what I know has not been an easy shift to how we actually lift up some of what the priorities are. But I want to publicly thank you because we've gotten closer every year. I just said to the board chair and vice chair, because they've been here long enough to know that we did not start in a place where we could give this kind of overview, but it's going to be the continued, I think, feedback from the board. But I just wanted to say thank you, and we can turn over to board questions, but thank you, team.
Thank you. One second, I saw Commissioner Sally and then Commissioner Esposito.
Yep. So to build just on the good work that you were just lifting up, Chief Doherty, one thing I think is really important to kind of call out as a highlight that I'm hoping that we see a little bit more are some deliberate connections around our investment in families, because they're an important part and link. And I have no doubt that that's like absolutely interwoven in our budget. But to the extent that we're connecting that kind of deliberate way so people understand how we're working at all levels and all interfaces in our work, I think that's going to go a long ways. But I do appreciate the really good work that you and your team have done over the years to continue to support our scholars.
Oh, hi. Yes. So I was wondering if under any of those categories, is there a budget improvement in school lunches? Because that seems to be like a major issue. I don't know. Like both for the athletes and just morale all across.
That's a very good point. And I'll certainly say that we have also heard that theme that you're touching on very much so. And I will say, actually, the enterprise fund budget was, it frankly was scarcely mentioned in this presentation. And rather than wing it too much now, I will make sure that both directly to you and in the budget book will speak more about both the enterprise funding amounts, but also what is being done to improve that situation. I do know that we are increasing our hiring, and one of the areas that Director Liz Marqueta would talk about was the difficulty, a few different types of difficulties, although she and her team, and we are all very open to those bits of feedback, not bits, to that feedback that we got, that there was a dip in the quality of school food. One, we think it was driven by a few things, not trying to do any excuse making, but just to give a little bit of context, and then we will flesh it out more in the follow-up materials. One, we were understaffed in food and nutrition. There were a lot of vacant positions that we weren't filling, and that made a smaller teams at sites scrambling more, and that has some difficulty. Second, and I'm almost surprised we did as well, maybe I'm fully surprised that we did as well as we did. Perhaps no other area was as hard hit as food and nutrition by the global and national supply chain issues. It was hitting us every single day on what we could and couldn't offer. And the other part of that was increases in input costs. And as we know, we get a certain rather modest amount of reimbursement from USDA. So we're forced to stay within that. It was kind of a triple whammy that did lead to less to food that was not as well received as it had been in the past. So that is absolutely on our FY24 list, and we'll flesh that out even more in a separate follow-up.
Commissioner Katsogbe and then Commissioner Kenyatta Bay.
Hi, thank you. So I had a couple questions. So first, we were talking about a lot of increases on here. We talked about a 6% increase in total budget, I think. If I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through slideshow. But I was wondering if the numbers in the slide are adjusted for inflation when we're talking about this versus the past fiscal year, because we know that has obviously had a pretty major effect on like what these numbers will look like based on, especially comparing it to last year.
That's a very good question, and the answer is no. We always use nominal dollars, but you make a good point that certainly the further back you go or the further ahead you go, the not adjusting for inflation has an effect. Usually on year comparisons, you're safe to keep it in actual dollars, but your point about inflation is also timely as we're seeing more inflation than historically high, but no, none of these dollars have been adjusted for inflation.
Okay, and my other sort of nerdy point of questioning was about the examples of investments. So when we're talking about like the investment, for like example, in the one that I noted was the fine arts investment of $1.9 million. So is that a $1.9 million increase versus the past fiscal year's budget, or is that $1.9 million in total for this specific program?
The 1.9 stated here is for that specific program. So it's not the total amount that we're spending for fine arts. So what we did is pulled out specific bullets, but we can give you a summative total for the fine arts.
Okay, cool. Sorry, that was just my one question regarding that. Oh, sorry. One last thing. I'm asking a lot of nerd stuff for the student commissioner role. I know. Sorry. Yeah. So when we were talking about. Yeah, I'm going to college for economics. So we were talking about the full-time equivalent positions. And there's an increase in school-based positions and district office-based positions, but school support positions have a decrease. Will that decrease result in layoffs, or will it just result in how will that impact the like actual functioning of current school support staff, as well as trying to have them better meet the needs of the students.
Yeah, so I know what you're pointing to. Those are not referencing layoffs. What it is really just some of the shifts that we discussed between what's referenced as central versus school-based. So some of what you're seeing is that positions that were historically in central office in support of schools, you know, above that 80% threshold, are being moved more towards being actual school-based positions. So they're just mathematically not being counted in central office anymore. So it's not really a reduction in the total number of positions. It's just the shifting in how they're proportioned.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and no layoffs.
Giving teacher wait time. Was that your with your thoughts right now? This is the time. This is the space. We can come. Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay.
That'd be a good thing. All right, anyway, so as I was saying, the question I have is the historical perspective that embedded in our coming along, because I wanted to know not only how we're migrating, but with distributions, how we are distributing and what return on investment or returns we got from our previous investment, and whether that has a weight on how much you placed in what bucket, so to speak. You know, and so that's basically that's the perspective I need, because we've just gone through a time of great upheaval and downturns and spin arounds and, you know, dive bombs, whatever. We've gone through so we need to find a line of normalization in order to really make a good decision on whether several expenditures are justified or unnecessary, whatever, you know.
Yeah, so yes, we'll provide more detail, and you'll see that in the budget book already, but we'll also provide more detail to you individually. If there's specific things that you want to hone in on, we can also dig in on those further as well too. But in the budget book, the standard format for the tables will usually show at least 2 prior years in addition to the year that we're proposing. So you'll have at least those 3 years for comparison. There are other things that we pull out where we show the investment from fiscal year 23 compared to 24, and we show what the increases are. So we will dig in on some of that. Yeah.
But will it also show basically our, you know, what we got out of it, whether or not it's justified to increase or decrease something, you know? How is that reflected? Yeah.
Within the format of the budget book, probably not as much on the table. So we have to find a better way to discuss that. And I think we can do it within the presentation and the meetings that we will have, like if there's specific ones. The budget book tables by default show the summary amounts.
Right.
We pull out in the narrative specific things, and in those we will highlight, you know, investments that we're continuing because they've yielded results and what's that's based on. But it's not going to be across the board for every, you know, bullet item, so to speak. Yeah.
And I would also say, Commissioner, I think that that's some of the work that the board has been doing around kind of academic impact work and the indicators and overall ROI that absolutely should inform the budget process, but has also been a lot of the work that's been engaged during the strategic planning process. And moving forward will be the source of like the board's discussion about the impact and achievement of the strategic plan that's in place. So that I think that's a lot of the work that Chief Jones has been doing with the board around the indicators. Sure.
Commissioner Kenyatta Bay, I actually have a small example, which I think gets to your point, in addition to what Courtney and Dr. Santalisa said. As part of our annual budget development process, the central office part of it, ROI is actually extremely prominent in those discussions. And what I think you said, it maybe not, I heard something like, you know, for example, something like ROI, because I at least initially, I think some people have, they wince almost, like I know I wince a little, like ROI when you're talking about, you know, education. But we've gotten past that. And for example, in the example that Chief Perkins Cohen happened to make kind of extemporaneously about the accounts payable office being small, and we're having a backlog, that's in Courtney's and my office. And we made a pitch that said, we need more people in accounts payable. And the pitch was very formally, and if we get these people, the average time for us to turn an invoice around is going to go from this date to this date. And it was that level of specificity that was required rather than maybe a subjective statement of we're really overworked, we're getting killed over here. And that doesn't really go anywhere. And in our case, we had the numbers and we had the backlog, but that ROI discussion, I think you'd be very pleased if you were a fly on the wall at how much ROI gets used. And again, it lends itself better in some instances than others. Like there are some times where it's just really a hard thing to measure. I mean, you have to do your best, but yeah, I think you'd like how much we are looking at ROI in order to justify additional resources or even continue similar resources.
Commissioner Brooks and then Commissioner Slater Harrington.
Hello, and it's good to see y'all. And so first, let me start off with a bit of thanks, because the work on SEL is more than previous years. So I at least want to acknowledge that you all are moving in the direction. For me, it's still not enough. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the conceptual challenges that I'm having with the budget related to this topic. So I'd love it if someone could talk to me first about how you're actually operationalizing wholeness, because there were a lot of different categories summed up in that total. And to start, it would help me understand sort of where you're coming from. So that's my first question. How are you operationalizing wholeness? And then I can go into my other questions.
So when we came out of the pandemic, Commissioner Brooks, one of the things that we hit hard on was on relationship building, right? That was the very first thing that we spent a number of sessions with principals, really driving home that when we come back from a virtual setting, that the relationships have to be built. The relationships have to be built so that, unfortunately, when something negative does happen, you actually hear about it beforehand and stuff gets squashed. You know your students well enough so that in the end, right, you can push them to higher levels to get to the colleges that we saw a little bit earlier. And so the relationship building, I think, is where we center a lot of our work. That is why we have pushed morning meetings. That's why we have pushed restorative circles in morning meetings, so that there is a time for that relationship building to occur. There are a lot of other aspects, I will agree with you, that kind of get labeled under wholeness, and you can get a little bit lost in that. So I appreciate your question with respect to that. We a lot of times talk about culture and climate a little bit differently than wholeness, because culture and climate, I think, doesn't always speak to the individual child. It speaks to the condition of the building and the group and the community together. But we do link that a lot, and it can be a little bit confusing. It is another area that we try to get very intentional on. I think if I push this even farther, right, you start getting into the whole child parts that are a little bit outside of academics. And I say a little bit because it's all really connected. Things like athletics, things like extracurriculars, right? In the last couple of years, we, have hired it's only one person, but we have one person pushing out with schools as many extracurricular options as possible. And so again, if you talk about athletics, if you talk about extracurriculars, if you talk about morning meetings, it all gets to a relationship building aspect. If you talk about some of the content, right, you start getting into some of the SEL practices, you start getting into some of the restorative practices, and then you start getting into the professional development around those areas. An example of this is our last professional development, which was a month ago, I think, right, was solely devoted to the different topics that I just mentioned. And so you had both secondary teachers and elementary teachers hearing from teachers that have done morning meetings and advisories incredibly well. You had a number of restorative circle sessions. And so, again, you get to the point of developing the adults in a lot of these practices. They hit a number of different topics. So again, right, I can understand how it kind of conflates with in different ways, but it really centers on the relationship building that students got to have with the adults in every single school.
And thank you, Chief David. So I think sort of as it relates to the budget specifically, so for relationship building, how much money have we earmarked specifically for that?
So for, for the different aspects, right, we didn't highlight, say, relationship building, but you can see the morning meeting in the slide, for instance. And, that is a combination of curriculum that we have. It is a combination of professional development. It is a combination of supports that we have. So, I don't know if we've, say, housed it in relationship building, but when you asked how are we going to operationalize it, right, we operationalize it from that standpoint.
Right. And so this is a question about the budget, right? So I'm asking like how much money. So I asked about operationalizing because I need to understand how you're thinking about making this real. And so you said relationship building. So my question as it relates to the budget, how much of the budget is dedicated to relationship building?
So if we wanted to add up all of the wholeness parts, I'm assuming we could do that, right, Courtney, Chris? I don't know if we've done that previously, but I'm sure we could do that.
Yeah, so I think one of the places where I struggle consistently about this topic is that it seems that there seems to be competing ideas about what wholeness is, and that may not be a standard. And so, for example, it looks like there's like $20 million, because I was adding up the numbers based on sort of what you outlined, that's targeted in this whole bucket around wholeness, 20 to 25, depending on what's considered inside of that category. And so my question becomes, I need to understand how much money is actually going to sort of the traditional therapeutic pieces around sort of wholeness, right? So those are trauma-informed care practices and principles. Those are actual how much we're earmarking for therapists. We know that we have social workers and therapists in every space, but that is one therapist for hundreds of students. So I need to understand the breadth of sort of what you're talking about in order to understand whether or not this is an actual meaningful intervention and investment, as you were talking about, in the students and children and families of Baltimore City who are experiencing ongoing trauma, which I'll talk to about later. But I'm just struggling that sort of like if 20 million we have earmarked, and there's so many different categories in there, are we actually going to be reaching our target of relationship building, climate and culture, and sort of the other piece that you mentioned? So I'm just not convinced that we're actually getting at SEL, because it's a hard piece. Is that if I ask you what it is, I should have a pretty standard answer. It shouldn't be like wondering or curiosity. Like there should be an operational definition that the district has that should be applied to what SEL means. And we should be using that to determine how much money we're actually giving to the student needs that we have. And so I don't see enough money for healing and remediating trauma. I know we've taken actions to do that, but this is a budget conversation. So I'm like, how much money, how much more money that we allocate for those services? And I don't see that.
Okay, I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about how we organized this, Chris. I will just say that that we've heard a lot about mental health, and so we tried to pull that out, right? And we tried to show some of the highlights in wholeness that are there. So I don't know if there's more organization that maybe we can do for Commissioner Brooks.
I think the short answer is yes, and I think it would, if you'd be willing to help us, finance anyway, categorize, like you're doing with relationship building or healing and remediating trauma, we can then go in and unpack some of those numbers. I do think, I confess also to sometimes having porous boundaries between certain things that are called SEL. And then when we go into the budget tool, for example, and take a good faith effort at frankly, counting certain categories, would be very open to getting some, it's kind of like keyword search. And I know that sounds a little further away from it, but kind of a keyword search. And I bet you'll also see, Commissioner Brooks, asterisks, about here's what we're assuming, and then there'll be numbers, because yes, we gave some rolled up numbers, but those rolled up numbers come from assumptions and going into the budget tool and looking at it. So with a little bit of back and forth, not too much, but probably more than tonight, we can get some terms from you and then match up. And I bet those who know more about these things, that I'm sure they're broadly quite aligned, but we might have counted something in one subcategory that you reasonably could think belong in another subcategory. So the short answer again is yes, we can break down those numbers.
Great, thank you. And I think that's So it's both the categorization of it, and then also we need to be able to track over time how much money we're actually investing in healing trauma that our students and families are experiencing, and particularly the district's role in providing those services. And it's hard to do when things are being conflated in this kind of way over time. So that's my bit about SEL. The last thing I'll ask about is particularly around professional development roles as related to organizational development. There were, I've had many conversations with folks, and I believe even Dr. Wu had sort of led a session on trying to make our teams and our organization function more effectively. And I'm curious, is there earmarked money as to growing out that particular function to increase the effectiveness of the staff to execute and implement their roles?
Yep. So I'm happy to say a little bit more about that. So the investment we were highlighting tonight is really at this teacher educator development. But I think what I hear you saying, I want to make sure I'm checking my understanding, is around organizational development. So central office pieces, right? And I think part of what we're doing now is there's been a space where some of the organizational development still resides in the human capital space, and then parts of the professional learning reside within academics, so the teacher education space, as well as some of our leadership development work. So all of these things have some overlaps, and yet they're also so distinctly important. And what I can say is we are right now in a space, and I don't want to speak for Chief Nielsen, but she's doing some work within human capital to build out exactly that organizational development and strategies to support development and needs for our district colleagues, our staff there around working with teams. In fact, tomorrow we're offering a session for our district office leaders around just sort of coaching and leadership management and pieces like that. So yes, those pieces are certainly growing and developing. And I think our approach specifically around developing teams in this space right now of academic sort of supporting that recovery work, supporting the challenges that we're facing right now, uniquely situated here, that we're feeling pressures on for sort of moving work quickly, moving work at a steep pace, those pieces. And how do you lead teams through those things? Those are all conversations we're having right now. And then how do we create stronger systems for efficiency? So when we talk things about sort of new enrollment tools or having some of these ITD systems in spaces, some of the new work that's coming from Chief Doherty around our AMP work, all of these things, I think, really feed into the organizational development that is, I think, a priority across multiple offices.
I will just, I did just want to interject one thing, sorry, Commissioner Arthur, that I do think it's been an iterative process to develop the categorization and the coding to align the kind of overall priorities that the board's expressed, right, that we have built into plans, and align that with, unfortunately, very much traditional budget, right, categories. I know she's not here now, but, you know, Commissioner Griffin, right, has done a lot of kind of the initial, was part of that initial like push to say, okay, how are we coding things differently so that we can build them out in ways, right, that we can track where the investments are and where the investments are even across schools and across the city. And so what I don't want to diminish is just how different this way of communicating out priorities is for a school district. Like, school districts don't normally, and I think frankly, we've even gotten to this point because of the push from the board, right? Because of the board, the public have said, look, there are these areas that I want to know, right? What our investment looks like in dollars and cents that matches up to what we've said we're doing. The other piece in that, I think, is the overlap of categories. And that's what we're getting into in terms of counting, right? So do you count developing people dollars, right? Under the human capital offices, right? PD for its own staff and central, right? Or do you count it as part of the capacity building to support schools? And is it in a different category in a different office? And so I think part of what the questions from the board and the public help us to do is to actually determine what some of those categories are, right? So part of why, and I'll say this because I think you were one of the first people to surface it, part of why you see the mental health category more specific this year is because of your questions, right? Because of your questions that said, well, what are we doing around mental health? In the same way that questions around building capacity for the entire organization will now influence, right, how we get ready to present numbers and how we make decisions about which category we put something in or not. It was the same thing with like pie charts this year that weren't here 4 years ago because of questions around central versus school funding and central support that's located in schools, but was previously opaque in the budget because of that. So I also don't want to act as if I want to be really forthright that, there's not like waving a magic wand. What we've done is tried to use the questions from the board, the questions from the public to inform what the categorization is of the dollars, right? In ways that, provide greater visibility, but we're still not totally there yet. And I just wanted to say that so that there's no kind of, misrepresentation. We've gotten better at it in part because of the questions that this body has asked, but it does not in any way mean that we're completely there because, I will just say there are not a lot of school districts that even attempt to do this. They'll take one or two high profile things, stick those out, and then you're back to your big old book of charts and graphs that nobody really wants to read. So we're trying, we're moving in that direction, but we're not fully, I think, there because each individual has the thing they want to see what we spend. And that was the work with Commissioner Griffith that I think was very helpful, right? She wants to see it this way, you want to see it this way. And I think what we're trying to do is reach some of that middle ground around what that categorization is. But I did just want to add that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Satsoulias, for that. I appreciate it. And the only thing I'll say about the organizational piece is that this is the time to, I think, take the resources necessary to build out that capacity, right? If we have the additional funds coming in, let's staff up the professional development. I don't care how you sort of frame it up in that space, but just to be able to see that we're actually making investments in helping our people to be better. And I think this is the time to use it. And all of my SEL stuff, it'll probably keep going on forever as long as I'm here. But great work for increasing the overall budget for that. Thank you.
Vice Chair McFadden, can I add one last thing to the discussion on this? No? Okay.
We're pretty serious.
You did look very serious. Commissioner Brooks, I wanted to add something, and I feel like Dr. Satsoulias kind of opened the door a little bit, and it came pretty quickly. It was one of the many highlights. But when you said 10 minutes ago about SEL, that's just not enough. It reminded me of comments you made in the past about about some of the mental health spending, and lest it get lost in the whoosh of information, the expanded school behavioral health contract, which finance is good at counting money in contracts, right? We're good at counting people, and this is the historical approach. We're good at counting people, and we're good at counting contracts, and there you have it. What we got from you and others was that the amount of money in the expanded school behavioral health contract wasn't enough, and it was good, and it could be better. And perhaps lost in the bullet was that's exactly what we did. We have gone up 306% in funding for that contract, and not only adding more money, which is of course where you put your money where your mouth is. It's also expanded it. I think Chief Davis said it kind of not in passing, but we didn't just add more money. There were 5 really good organizations that were participating in BAs, and we went to 7. Now, as far as the granularity goes, I do think it's going to be hard to know, like, let's take that $7 million. When we look back at that $7 million, we will be able to say that X went to Bayview Hopkins and X went to Shepherd Pratt and X went to University of Maryland and Hope and Catholic Charities. I don't know how much more we'll be able to say on that, but we totally get you, we got your point. And we really hope you see and know that that was because of feedback we got from the board to go from 1.7 million to 7 million in a relatively short amount of time. Thanks.
Can I just add one more point on this too, is that one other thing I think is a little bit lost in the slide is that the dedicated crisis response team that we talked about is, we very unfortunately have to provide crisis response constantly in our schools. And so the way we've done that is we've coupled together folks who are already existing in the schools or taken people from other schools to go provide those services. By having a dedicated team, it means that the folks who are in their schools and have relationships in their schools can stay in their schools. And so then we have folks who can go to respond to the emergency of the moment, but it's not robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking student support person out of their school to go to another school where a more pressing need exists. So I think that's just an important point too.
In addition to leveraging some of our community partners that we have as well, that we procure. Commissioner?
Thank you. First, I want to recognize the CFO and Courtney for providing such a thorough, I got to meet with them. They provided a very thorough foundation for me. And I want to publicly acknowledge your transparency and your leaning towards continuous improvement. I think that will go a long way in instilling public trust and changing the narrative about Baltimore City and our stewardship of public dollars. So thank you for your work. I'm going to give a frame and try to get all of my questions and wonderings out so you know what I'm thinking. And it may be more appropriate in our budget meetings, and that's okay to have those conversations. But here goes what I'm thinking. One is my first 2 board meetings, we talked or we heard from the public really around safety. We talked a lot about doors and also social, emotional, and mental safety. And so I'm glad that this conversation is coming up around budget, right? Because when it gets budgeted, it gets done. And I think that there are questions that are being answered, at least in my head, as we go through here my whole 3rd meeting. But as we arrived here, that still harken back to those early meetings. One is last meeting, we approved a contract around doors and maintenance to doors. And then I see additional facility investment now with people. And for me, in my head, I'm putting that together and saying, okay, we're being responsive as much as we can to those initial concerns about physical doors, but the facilities of it. And so I wanted to share that thinking because I don't want to make the assumption that that is it if it's not. So I know I'm just gonna get it all out and then and if it is it, then I want to publicly recognize that that we are hearing and acting on the public engagement. The second concern I feel very happy and strong about is making sure that all of our students benefit from fine arts, period. So to see that investment in this presentation was heartwarming, but I balance it both with concerns across the board, fine arts, teachers, and mental health specialists. I love to see the investment and the allocation in the budget, but I also know from my own hiring practices, my own investments in my day job that it is hard to find the human resource and to be able to compete with that. I know one of my child's school, it's not for lack of funding, it is a lack for the capable humans to do the job. And so I love seeing it, but I also want to know what incentives are, because it's more than just budgeting it. What is the strategy behind making sure that we can get capable staff in to fill those positions? And then, well, we could leave it there because I forgot my last point. Let's go.
Well, maybe by the time we answer these questions, then it'll come back to you, so we can go back to it. So on the first question about maintenance, or the investment in the people. So the investment in the people is about additional folks to support maintenance. So I'm going to do my best with the for Chief Washington. So if I get something wrong, we'll let you know. But we're going to try to invest in the in more in our maintenance of our schools. This part of this is part of an ongoing commitment we made as part of the 21st Century Buildings Plan. So when that original bill passed, we had made a commitment to increase our maintenance contribution each year for 9 years. And so that commitment is still ongoing. I will say, even with that commitment, it was a $3 million a year increase in our maintenance commitment for a period of 9 years. So a $27 million increase. Even with that increase, our maintenance expenditures and our capital expenditures are well below industry standards. So it's a necessary investment. It's a helpful investment. And our operations team, I think, is exceptional at weaving gold out of straw. So taking resources that are too small for to meet the need and doing their best with them, but it is still too small. So I think I've shared it before, but the total investment based on industry standards that we should have every year for maintenance and capital is about $350 million. We have about $80 million. So it is a drastically below the standards, and the amount that we receive for things like capital, like from the city of Baltimore, the amount we receive for capital is $19 million a year, when comparable jurisdictions like Baltimore County, Montgomery County, they're receiving more in the neighborhood of 180 or $190 million a year. So it's 90% below what other counties receive. The amount that we spend on maintenance and capital is about 80% below industry standards. And so that means that this is an important investment. You will, I think, see an appreciable difference in what schools experience. And I think over the last few years under Chief Washington's leadership, I think schools have experienced a more effective maintenance of their buildings, but it is not solving the problem, and it's not specific to the doors issue. As we talked about with the doors and windows issue, that alone is a $20 million investment from an estimate from a few years ago. And so to do that, again, we're getting $19 million a year from the city for all of our capital expenses across all of our buildings, not just doors and windows. So, so that's the magnitude of the disparity between the resources we have versus the resources we need. So I'll let you do the arts.
Sure. Yeah, no, and thank you for lifting up the challenge of recruiting, retaining, finding great fine arts teachers. That has been and can something that we know we need to get better at. And so one of the things we did early on with Chief Nielsen's arrival is link her with the arts community that we meet with quarterly, who advocate incredibly well for fine arts, and is their work that has brought us to where we've been able to make the investments we've made so far. And there is continued work to do around a very clear HC strategy for how we go and find talented artists who want to teach. We need to do better around how we free up some of the bureaucracy around certifications and such, to where we can get creative with bringing people in who may be really excited to teach. And then it goes back to, how do we do their induction? How do we mentor them? Those of us who've been in the fine arts world know that sometimes we're sort of the singleton in a school. And so how do we find our people? How do we find our peers? So how we think about cohorts of teachers so that they're supported in those early years to stay. So that's work we're doing, in addition to providing materials, equipment, and such. We've got to get the staff. So that is on top of mind for us as we're trying to build this work out.
I would just encourage for children with special needs, starting with therapeutic arts as your scaffolding up to the fruition of your strategy.
Commissioner Coy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of the work and for the dialogue here that we're having. Incredibly appreciate this conversation, this opportunity. I'm thinking back, and I've been thinking, Chief Doherty, about your comment about capturing the human element. And it's absolutely true that the numbers, are large and varied. And, the old adage, if you torture a number long enough, it will confess to anything, I think is absolutely true when dissecting the numbers in all sorts of different ways. There's one thought that I've been sitting with for some time, not just tonight, but as I've come onto the school board, and that is a lot of times we think about and we talk about the revenue of dollars in terms of per pupil. And when we talk about some of the expenditures as it relates to various contracts or various items, the per pupil amount isn't as articulated or as present. And I just think about this a lot as a way to process the amount of information that we're looking at, we're talking about here. So for example, in some of the items here, it did reference a little bit of in the athletic section about, X amount of dollars is coming for this, or it's mandated through some of the requirements. And as we contemplate some of these expenditures, being able to think about them and saying, if there's 17,000 of per pupil funds being received, this expenditure is anticipated to impact, and I know this is a calculation, it's not going to be a precise as it could be, but having that understanding that of that amount that we're anticipating, this would represent, is this $1,000 of that student's amount that is going towards us? Is that $1 from that? Is that, understanding the expenditure and the planned expenditure in relation to the per pupil amount is a way that I think we can capture the human element and really think about the students that we are serving and what they are receiving as it relates to this, and put it into that context. As we think about things like social emotional learning or the trauma response, what amount is that of a student's total what they are receiving, right? And I also and just concerned and wanting to see that that we are making these proactive investments, and it's really expensive to be reactionary all the time. And I think the history of the 21st century schools and the work that we said, hey, we're going to be spending money maintaining, or we can make an investment in building new that will have a lower cost. I think some of the work that was done around that could be something that we look to and say, how do we invest in ways that will then decrease the more expensive response, emergency response? And as we think about things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we want our students to achieve self-actualization and to be at the pinnacle of that, and we know they can. And yet there are so many items that are impacting that at the base of that pyramid on a daily basis. And so what are we doing to invest in some of those areas is something that I'm looking for and thinking about and wanting to understand, what percentage of a per pupil amount is being spent towards that. So I look forward to asking and joining in the questions between now, and I really appreciate how this is an opening conversation and wanting, I think all of us are sharing ways that we are thinking and looking at these to help inform the dialogue that is continuing, here at the board level, that is building on so much of the community engagement. So thank you for the work, and I look forward to digging deeper. I don't need if you have thoughts about how you have been contemplating and thinking about the per pupil on the expenditure side, I'd love to hear those, but I don't expect those in this context right here. I do want to have that conversation between now and May 9th, absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner Coy. And Chief Doherty, as you're about to respond, and maybe Chief Perkins Cohen, I'm not sure if you're going to chime in. Can you juxtapose that with the new funding formula and how that works out with counting poverty and how that aligns to per pupil? Are we able to discuss that? I'm asking the chiefs, like, it's rare that we see like you all here in this setting. But I think it raised something for me in thinking about it. There is a new formula. There are all of these new things. How does that align kind of to Commissioner Coy's point? But then how does that impact the budget proposal that we have before us tonight, potentially next year? Like what are the implications of that?
Allison should do the poverty.
Okay.
And then Chris, you can come in and fill in the other places. Thank you.
So trying to figure out how to condense my poverty response. So unfortunately, the way that poverty is counted for Baltimore City is not representative of the poverty that we have. And so we are, so tell me if, like, there's a lot here. So if I go way off track, bring me back to where I need to get to your answer. We're a community eligibility provision district, and so our poverty is counted based on direct certification, which is it's an okay way to count poverty. It's a proxy for poverty. It's not every student who's poverty. It's a representative sample of students who are on TANF or SNAP or so on. It's a more concentrated form of poverty than, say, a FARMS form, which also includes reduced poverty, students are reduced.
A FARMS form is free and reduced
reduced
lunch form.
Right. And so, thank you. And so direct certification is more akin to free lunch. It's a more severe form of poverty. And so again, it's not all students are in poverty. It's a subset. We've been doing this since, I think, 2015 or 16. We've been a CEP district, 15. And so when you make that shift, a district's poverty rate, does that really just get really loud? The district's poverty rate goes down significantly. And so the challenge in particular presents in Maryland is that most districts are not CEP districts. So our relative poverty we look less poor in comparison to other jurisdictions than is really true. In the Kerwin legislation, there was language in there that asked for a study, the MSDE to do a study of counting poverty using neighborhood indicators of poverty. And that method of counting poverty using the American Community Surveys Index is a much more nuanced way to count poverty. It looks at, it's passively verified, it's using census data, and it uses multiple indicators like median household income, number of single family households. It could look at things like home ownership in the census block area. And by doing that, and Superintendent Chaudhry did a study about that, by doing that, you get an apples to apples view across the state of relative poverty and concentrations of poverty specifically. And when you count poverty that way, you see specifically that Baltimore has much broader range of poverty and much deeper range of poverty than the rest of the state. And so currently they don't use that form of poverty is not used. That method of counting is not used.
Yeah, well, and what I hear you, I'll reflect back what I hear you saying and then hopefully try to refine my question a little bit, which is similar to answering the question, how much is a teacher paid? You have to look at the matrix to say how many years, what's their degree, there's all sorts of questions. It is not so simple to answer the question of what is the per pupil cost for a specific student. You have to count the different ways in which concentration of poverty and other factors are being applied in a specific school. And I know have talked about this broadly in some of the school-based allocations of funding. Going up to the higher altitude and saying recognizing that there does need to be a degree of imprecision, but that the value of saying if we are spending, for example, if we're looking and saying we're spending, $7.9 million for this aspect of student wholeness, but it's spread out among all students across the whole district, that is a very different question than if we're spending that much in just high schools or in just elementary schools. And it is difficult, I imagine, not only for us as commissioners, but also for the public at large and for folks in looking at this to say, when we're seeing these large numbers of expenditures, how does that actually translate to on a per student basis? And so thinking of and I know this is adding an additional complexity or component, and I want to recognize that you all have added so much, and that each thing has to be evaluated in comparison to the information that it will provide. Does this provide actionable insight that can help increase student learning and outcomes? And so wanting to find a way at that high altitude to be able to understand an approximation of, of how much this translates to on a per pupil basis, recognizing that all students receive the same thing, right? There's a lot of different activities that they receive, but of those that would receive X, we anticipate it as a Y cost per student, is a way that I know I could more easily wrap my sort of understanding around the budget numbers.
But so all students don't receive the same?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think you're saying they do receive the same. They do
No,
not.
no, they don't. No,
They don't.
Right, they don't.
Right.
Just like a teacher, all teachers are not paid the same amount.
Right.
And so there's a complexity there, and yet the ability to look at some of that and either look at an average or based off of a user story, right? So saying if a teacher has this many years and this sort of thing, that's what you see in terms of a pay increase, for example, from one contract to the next, being able to give some insight that these dollars are anticipated to benefit these students, and for the students this is designed for, it would represent this amount of their per pupil of what they would be on a per pupil basis, right? It's matching those things up from how we think about revenue sometime in some contexts to how we think about expenditures, because in the absence of that matching, it's always apples to oranges. It's always sort of impossible to then tie that back to how does this represent the investment, the total investment.
Well, so at the school level, we have to be able to show how much we're investing in students based on their poverty and based on their concentrations of poverty. The purpose of Kerwin was to direct more resources to students living in poverty and to recognize the difference of concentrations of poverty.
Yeah.
So that is in the way that schools are funded. Schools do receive their money that way to a degree. I mean, this year we're going to have to take a step backwards because of a change in the way that it's counted this year. So we haven't communicated this yet because it changed after we gave out allocations to schools, and we're going to figure out how to handle it. But there's a different way they're counting, that the state is counting poverty now for concentrations of poverty that is making is diminishing the difference between the real differences between schools' poverty that you're trying to get at is being diminished now because of this larger challenge I'm talking about, how to count poverty. And so we gave out this money in a certain way that did invest more in schools that had higher levels of poverty. But there is now a change in the concentrations of poverty grant that we're going to have to reckon with. We tried to get it changed in the legislature. Sine die was yesterday. We did not get it changed. So we're going to have to deal with that that's aside from your question. And again, we haven't even communicated this yet, but that is a challenge. So there is more investment that happens in schools that have poverty. We can show you the relative investment of poverty and concentrations of poverty in schools. And we have tried to provide schools with guidance about how to use those resources. And in concentrations of poverty, we do have a centralized plan to try to provide those kind of enrichment, world languages, kind of additional services that we want students to have to concentrations of poverty schools. I would just say that in general, it is woefully insufficient still, the ability for our to differentiate because of this larger statewide problem of not counting poverty. And Baltimore was drastically undercounted this year. This new investment that the state made in Medicaid, we did not benefit from. So there's just a number of ways it still needs to be a lot done to fix it.
I would just also add, Commissioner Coy, excuse me, and Vice Chair McFadden mentioned it in his comments as well, and Allison as well. You're absolutely right, and I think this is part of what you're getting at. We're getting more per pupilized from the revenue side, right? And it's complicated, and we're trying to help people understand that one of the things that is how it's additive, right? From a Kerwin point of view, if you have a child who's received special education services, she gets the special education per pupil amount. If she happens to be an English learner, you add the English learner amount. If she happens to be counted as a child whose family lives in poverty, you add that. It gets complicated. And one of the ways this manifests as complicated is, well, what's the average per pupil at school number 12? And what you have to do is you add up the actual kids, some of whom have the multiple, the multiple streams, and then you divide. And that's kind of a de facto number, even if no child at that school, even if it's a contrived number. When you talk about the expenditure side, I think we're picking up what you're putting down. And in the following way, if you see in the highlights that some initiative is costing 100,000, you might say, well, is that good or is that not so good, right? If it was for every kid, the per pupil on that would be a dollar and change, right? $100,000 divided by 70,000 plus kids. If it's only for new middle school sports, not previously covered, then it's $100,000 divided by maybe, let's say, 1,000 kids, right? And so I'm checking my comprehension. Like you saw in the materials where we did, in some instances, say, for athletics, we're arriving at this number, $50 per kid for this, $100 per child for this, right? And that's why we per pupilize things, to say it's per capita per kid. And I think we can absolutely do more of that. And I'll take you up on your offer to say do most of it, separately. I think you'll find, like in other instances, there'll be some that lend itself quite well to it, and others will be kind of maybe second gen or third gen to be able to do it. And often we're better at saying what happened, like in the past, like we spent this money and we spent it on this, and this is how many kids got it. Then we have more clarity. As we project, like any budget book does, into FY24, we'll be making estimates, except for the ones like the sports where that's how we arrived at the number. But I think you raise a good point, and the finance office and others are aware of that. There are some arcane reporting requirements that we have now that require a back-ended per pupil expenditure. I don't know how illustrative they are. I don't think they're as illustrative as what you're after, but we will definitely follow up in that vein.
Just a comparison point to that. So the per pupil expenditure, Commissioner Coy, is a very complex thing for all states and all LEAs. So when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was reauthorized in 2015, the federal government gave all states a really long runway to start to implement and start to calculate those data points. I believe school year 18-19 was the first school year that all states had to start to report that number. I think where the complexity comes into play is where, as state funding formulas change, as different things happen on the ground, it gets hard, as Chief Doherty was saying, to compare apples to apples from year to year to year to year. And so I think this is where I think most systems are trying to do their very best job at trying to get those numbers as granular as they can, but it is just a complex task to do. So it is a reference number, not a precise number when they actually roll those out. I don't know if I'm misspeaking, Chief Doherty.
No, not
Yeah.
at all.
So it's something
right.
that we see on the national level affecting every single state, every single LEA out there in terms of how they calculate those numbers. So the federal law gives LEAs large discretion in terms of how they actually calculate those numbers. LEAs are looking for guidance and direction from their SEAs in terms of how they actually get there. But that's just kind of what's happening nationally and annually.
Yeah, thank you. That you hit it right on the head. And we've actively been working as part of Kerwin, what are we going to have to do is report on a per pupil basis for a lot of things. So we're actively working with the other districts to come to the same understanding of what those things are, because how we may define things could be different from how a different county defines them. But to your point, we can absolutely think of our city schools way of how we want to look at that information, put it together, and work on something that, we can share with you.
Thank you for that.
Can I just add one more thing? I think that per pupil piece, what also makes it very, very hard for schools and for us to implement this this way of funding, because it's very unpredictable. I mean, so to Commissioner Sally's point, like this is something that it's understandable why people consider it desirable and there are benefits to it, but it's very unpredictable. So when you look at year to year changes in schools, it's wild, the changes, because you're going down to the student, you're legislated down to the student level. It's really difficult to do. There's just too many variables in it. And so that makes it really hard too. It's hard to report. It's also hard to be predictable. So you saw it at the state level in the legislature this year. A lot of the cities and states were feeling like it was unpredictable what was happening. I think ours was actually fairly predictable. I know the city didn't feel that way, but we actually knew that was the amount that the city was going to have to pay this year. So it was fairly predictable for the city amount, but the amount that we received was not predictable. And that happens at the school level too. So all of this gets really complicated when you legislate down to the student level.
Thank you. I do too. In addition to this, what are the implications of no longer receiving ESSER funds? Is that somehow, as we think ahead, like as we're thinking beyond FY24, right, when we're about to receive, it's a conversation that we're having all over the country. Superintendents and board members all over the place are wondering, especially systems like ours that received so much money, systems all over received this additional money. What does that look like for city schools as we see the ESSER funds here now? And I know you were talking about this a few weeks ago. What does that look like for us? Yes, we do have Kerwin. We're beneficiaries of that in Maryland. But what does it look like for city schools to no longer receive these funds that this board particularly have become very comfortable with having cushion our budget? Because we've received them for this will be the third or the fourth year of third. So what does that look like for us?
No, and it is absolutely the right question, Commissioner McFadden. And I would say I do want to give a shout out to two folks who are not here, Dr. Wu and Kim Hoffman. And part of why I say their names, it's not because they're the only ones working on it, but they are the ones who really have been charged with, in my mind, being the canaries in the mine, and being able to review what goes on ESSER dollars, what is categorized more as one-time expense as opposed to ongoing expense. And even with, to your point, even with Kerwin dollars, and we have far more cushion, it might not feel like it, but talking to colleagues across the country, we actually have far more cushion than many of them do. We have taken a look in this budget process. And one of the questions has been when people say, oh, well, let's just use ESSER dollars to do that. Dr. Wu and Kim Hoffman are very good at saying, okay, that's a nice answer, but what actually then goes away as a result of it? And it is always harder. It is the culture of schools and school districts. Since I've been in this work, we don't like saying no to things. Like, we don't like saying this piece may need to go away. I think what is insulating us from that to a certain extent is that we really did try to shift one-time expenses
to ESSER dollars, so that there's not the recurring cost that then needs to be picked up in general fund dollars. I think the other piece is that at the school level, there's been a heavy emphasis on using the concentration of poverty dollars for more of the long-term actual investments of people. That being said, there's still some trim, like there's still some things that like you conveniently put on one grant for now that we realize we're going to have to make decisions about, again, some of the things we've been talking about all night, like return on investment. And it actually requires us to be able to get our head around what's happening. But I will say part of what allows me to sleep at night is, to put it bluntly, two people who watch the wall, who actually look and say, okay, we're putting this on this grant, but asking the question you're asking, they've been asking it the last 3 years. Like, okay, you've got this for 2 years, but this goes away in 2024. And naming when it's convenient, which is why, as Courtney pointed out earlier, we have spent down our ESSER dollars. We are not a district that's going to be out there exposed because we gave lots of money back. But it also requires that question to be asked for every expense, particularly around the increases in FTEs and building in things that will go away. And a great example of that, and I know Cleo isn't here any longer, she's moved on to the next position, but a great example of that was a lot of the early dollars around COVID mitigation, right? And COVID response. And I think because she went into it not with oh, it's really, really important and we've got to keep it always, she went into building it knowing that that money would go away. And I will say a lot of the team, right, which is why people are reluctant. They don't want to say to individuals, the role you are now in might need to end because of funding or need. I think one of the things that she did incredibly well was she planned for her people to be tooled up in ways that now they are highly desirable across the organization. And I think it's the intentionality that in some places we've done really well. And in other places we're asking the hard questions now. But I absolutely, that's, I've been quiet most of the night, but that's why I dove into this question, because it absolutely is front of mind. And it is front of mind in a lot of districts that have demographics similar to ours, because to put it bluntly, we know that if we don't spend it well, if we give money back, if there is a funding cliff, the immediate knee-jerk narrative is going to be mismanagement. You don't know how to plan. You don't know how to do that. So again, I don't, in that case, and these folks know this, I'm sorry if your feelings get hurt, but the reality is that's part of the fiscal responsibility that I feel as if I hold.